Ending slavery was not the reason a civil war was fought at all. The Civil War was fought to bring the South back into unison with the North and to destroy the economic advantage that the South had had due to slavery. They cared nothing about the lives of black people. They cared nothing about the way that we were treated. They cared nothing about African life. It was not about protecting us because they had somehow waken up and realized that we were human beings too. No, the South was growing too powerful.
During slavery, there was something called the Seminole Wars. There were many slave rebellions in this country that a lot of people don't talk about. In the 1800s, there were really a lot of slave rebellions, and people were very nervous about what was going on, what had gone on in Haiti, because Haiti had made themselves independent by having a big slave uprising. There was the Nat Turner Rebellion in the early 1800s. People were still shook about that. You had the Denmark Vesey. He was going to have a slave rebellion in South Carolina. That got foiled, but they had up to 9,000 people ready to put in work. So a lot of people were very nervous about slave rebellions in this country. The Seminole War, it was a war of Native American and black people mixed together, calling themselves Seminoles, because there's no such thing as a Seminole Indian. A Seminole Indian, it's a made-up term. A Seminole basically means runaway by definition. A lot of black people were fighting for their freedom. The image of black people just sitting around waiting on people to free them, that's an image to keep us submissive.
It was also not economically feasible because of the rebellions that were going on. See, we're not talking about just slavery. We think there was slavery and there was a couple of rebellions like Nat Turner, who, by the way, my wife is a descendant of Nat Turner. And they were thinking that it was just Nat Turner. They were burning and destroying, and there was true guerrilla warfare going on.
Ending slavery was not the reason a civil war was fought at all. The Civil War was fought to bring the South back into unison with the North and to destroy the economic advantage that the South had had due to slavery. They cared nothing about the lives of black people. They cared nothing about the way that we were treated. They cared nothing about African life. It was not about protecting us because they had somehow waken up and realized that we were human beings too. No, the South was growing too powerful.
Capitalism started to rise. But what began to happen is that in capitalism rising, it began to stifle capitalism, because capitalism demands, as an economic system, that people are always trying to rise to the higher. They're competing. Competition fuels capitalism. But if you could buy an African for $300 and then pay somebody for 20 years $300 a year, which would you do? You'd buy someone one time for $300. But that's going to stifle capitalism, because what's going to happen is there's going to be no competition, because what European is going to compete for a job that they could buy an African to do? So the North said, look, enslavement of African people is stifling capitalism. And so the South said, so what you want me to do? They said, well, you got to free your Africans. I said, free my Africans? Well, how am I going to get my money? North said, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. They said, we don't trust you. No, we're not going to sell our, we are not going to stop enslaving Africans. We're just not going to do it. North said, but you have to, because it's going to stifle capitalism, and we're going to choke with overproduction without an ability to sell what we're the South said, but that's not my problem, because I can sell my raw materials any place in the world. The North said, but then what would happen to us? We have factories. The South said, well, that sounds like a personal problem to me. I don't care what happens to you. North said, but you can't do that. South said, we're going to do that. We're not freeing Africans. They said, you got to free Africa. We're not freeing. In fact, the South said to the North, I'm tired of talking to you. I'm going to secede. I'm not even going to talk to you no more. In fact, I'm not even part of what your colonies are anymore. North said, you can't do that. South said, watch. That started the Civil War.
Well, one of the big things that occurred right at the end of the Civil War was that Europeans began to form unions. In fact, the workers' union is an outgrowth of slavery and the Civil War. When it looked like the cause was lost for the Confederacy, white men began to organize themselves into labor forces. Why did they do this? Because you are about to see 2 million enslaved Africans set free who have skills that equal or supersede your own, who would now be able to compete and vie with you for contracts and livelihood. that was a significant area of concern for white men. Okay, so if I was a European who was looking for work, couldn't find any because it had already been hired up to the slaves of a certain master. So when the Civil War came about and when slavery was about to end, that intensified. Because now slaves would be aggressively looking for work because when slavery ended, they had nothing to which they could claim their own to make a living. So that bothered Europeans, and they set up agreements, okay, with those who had industries and those who had stores that you could only hire someone who was white who belonged to a particular laborers union. In fact, some of the first unions were started right here in Pennsylvania. And a lot of black people fail to realize the origin of the union. The union is nothing but a collective force of white people who are protecting jobs for themselves and keeping them away from black people.